Alvin Thomas started hearing the voices before he was 30. At first, he could manage those voices. They weren't too loud. They didn't talk to him all that often. He could hold a steady job at a warehouse. He could live on his own, a virtue he prized tremendously. And he truly loved living in his hometown of New Orleans. His family, his friends, his neighborhood. As the years went by, the voices inside his head grew louder. They grew more frequent. Alvin found that he was having trouble concentrating. He was easily distracted. And on really bad days, other people found it hard to understand what he was trying to say. Before he was 50, he could no longer hold a job of any kind. He couldn't live on his own. And he finally, after much resistance, moved in with his parents in the 9th Ward. They were both almost 80 at the time. His parents both knew he was sick. Alvin refused to go to a doctor. But finally, he allowed his mom to contact a social worker and to talk to her a few times about what his life was like. Eventually, the social worker told his mom that she thought that Alvin had schizophrenia. Alvin's mom tried to explain this to him. The word schizophrenia meant nothing to him at all. But he certainly identified with what she said when she talked about the voices, the hallucinations, the delusions, and the suspicion of anybody he didn't know. For the next few years, Alvin struggled with life with his parents, but he got by. Then in August of 2005, Hurricane Katrina arrived, one of the most powerful hurricanes to hit the Gulf Coast. The winds rotated around. They came to Lake Pontchartrain, the body of water just north of New Orleans, and quite literally pushed the water out of the lake onto the city. Rains came down in sheets. Canals and levees overflowed and broke. And as the water started to rise in their home, Alvin and his parents knew they were in trouble. By the time the water was up over their ankles, they had no choice but to leave. They had no time to take anything with them or to do anything to protect their home. They literally ran for their lives. They managed to make it to the Louisiana Superdome. Some of you have been there in person. Others have seen it on TV. What you might not have noticed is that there's an interstate highway that goes right next to the Superdome. And in that part of town, it's elevated to allow local traffic to drive underneath. Along with thousands of other New Orleanians, Alvin and his parents climbed up onto the bypass and shivered and huddled for 3 days. No food, no water, no bathrooms, just the hot sun and the muggy evenings. Finally, as the water began to recede a little bit, relief could get to them, and eventually large buses came to take all of the people off the overpass to shelters, some near New Orleans, many further away. Imagine, if you will, the scene, what it must have been like when those buses arrived. Thousands of people destitute, shivering, thirsty, hungry, scared. It was complete chaos. In the midst of the confusion, Alvin was separated from his parents. He got on a bus. He had no idea where it was going, but anything was better than the interstate highway. And he didn't know where his parents were. The bus took off, and after many hours, it finally arrived. And eventually, Alvin figured out he was in Charlotte, North Carolina. After about 2 weeks, he found out that his parents' bus had gone to Atlanta, Georgia. So think now for a moment where Alvin found himself. A completely different state, a totally different city. He knew no one, he had no money, he had no job, he had no family. And somehow, for almost 2 years, he survived. Eventually, a social worker in Charlotte found the money to get him a bus ticket back to New Orleans, because Alvin made it clear it was time to go home. He arrived in June of 2007, almost 2 years after Katrina had hit. New Orleans didn't look the same. Street after street of boarded-up houses, boats sitting on top of buildings, debris everywhere, and these big spray-painted X's on all the houses, where the National Guard troops had gone in after the flood to find out who was dead. Somehow, Alvin found his way back to his parents' home. He managed to pry the plywood off the door that helpful neighbors had put up, the doors, the windows, to protect the house from looters and squatters. And then some neighbors came by and took the plywood off the windows. The house was destroyed. It had no electricity, it had no running water, there was no bathroom. The back of the house had a hole from a tree that had fallen on it that took up much of the roof and the wall. Alvin subsisted by going to the local food bank and getting canned food. He went to the bathroom in the backyard, and he was totally alone. 9 months later, a team from St. James Episcopal Church here in Richmond arrived to try to help Alvin with his home. I was privileged to be a member of that team. On the Monday that we started work, Alvin knew we were coming, and he left the house shortly before we arrived. He didn't trust us. He didn't know who we were. And the caseworker who was helping Alvin trying to survive said he would pretty much spend the day wandering around the neighborhood in the 9th Ward, looking for food, talking to people occasionally, but moving. He said it helped him relax. As we walked into Alvin's home, the smell was overwhelming. Rot, mold, some of the walls were green with the condensation. The smell of the outdoor bathroom, and the open cans of food that Alvin had forgotten to finish. We started with a demolition project unlike any other I've ever been on. Plaster walls, ceilings, you name it. We tore it out. We took the house literally down piece by piece, except for the framework. We did the same on Tuesday. By Wednesday, we were actually beginning to rebuild. But Alvin was nowhere to be seen. He was still wandering the streets. What we began to notice was, by Tuesday afternoon, that Alvin must have felt a little bit more comfortable with us. He hadn't tried to hide all the cans of food. He was leaving his blanket, his pillow, and his sheet on the dirty mattress he found on a pile of debris and an army cot. You probably know the one with those little tight springs. They're not very comfortable. On Thursday afternoon, as we started to reframe the back of his house, to repair the roof, and to do some of the interior work that would allow another team to do the drywall, and turn what was a hovel into a home, we had a surprise. About a half an hour before we finished work, Alvin Thomas reappeared. He said not a word. He wouldn't shake hands. He wouldn't look any of us in the eye. But he just stood and he watched. Our last day of work was a Friday at the end of the week. And we had another surprise, because at lunchtime, Alvin reappeared again. And this time, he shook our hands, and he looked us in the eyes, and he spoke to us. It was very hard to understand him, but we figured a way. And in the afternoon, he picked up a hammer, and we got him to work on his own home, hammering nails as best he could. When the day was done, and we could all shake hands, look him in the eye, and give him a hug, we felt good about what we'd done, and we felt Alvin did too. We flew out on a Saturday morning and returned to Richmond. It was a call from one of our contacts in New Orleans. She had gone by Alvin's to see how he was doing, and she found him on the porch, collapsed. There was no idea as to how long he'd been there. Monday morning, I got the second call, and Alvin was dead. An undiagnosed brain tumor that had claimed his life. As the word spread among the mission team and around St. James, there were people who asked, was the work that we did in vain? We put in our time, our energy, our money, and now Alvin was gone. And my answer was the same the first day as it is today. And that is, it was anything but in vain. I think about what Alvin's last final days might have been like without somebody there to help him. What it would have been like for him to die, being alone. Today, when we go back to New Orleans, as I will in a couple of weeks, we'll take the opportunity to stop by the Thomas home. His parents will be there. The home is fixed, it's complete, and they have a place to stay. So our work was not in vain. And most importantly, our work was not in vain, because what we did was that we tried to give a gift to Alvin, and it's a gift we believe he accepted. It was the gift of self. And this morning, as you leave chapel, I hope you'll keep this idea in mind, because I believe it is the core of service. Service really isn't about race, or gender, or religion. It's not about the money we give, or the cans we collect, or the events we sponsor, or those gaudy-looking t-shirts with the amazing pictures and the funny inscriptions. It's not about geographical location. It's not about social class. It's about one thing and one thing only: the gift of yourself. So as we begin the 100 days, I encourage you to find opportunities to give the gift of yourself. Whatever your talents, whatever your abilities, whatever your time. These 100 days, the 100 days that follow those, the 100 days that follow those, and however many hundreds of days you have in your life. And if you want a formula to operate by, I can think of none that is better than the one that I heard Wes Moore give in a speech some time ago. He was talking about his work in Baltimore and looking out for kids who are in tough situations in tough neighborhoods in Baltimore. And believe me, having gone to Hopkins, I know exactly what he's talking about. And somebody asked him the question, they said, well, Wes, I'm not from Baltimore, I'm not going to be able to do that. Am I out of the picture? And Wes looked at that person and he said, thank you for your question, but here's all that matters. Do something. Thank you.